Hi there and welcome to Central Texas Gardener. I'm Tom Spencer. When things don't work out with our plants, one temptation is to blame the weather. But it goes deeper than that. Today, horticulturalist Pat McNeal explains why good plants can go wrong. On tour, let's visit Mueller, where prairies, gardens, and wildlife replace former airport runways.
Everybody's garden, reflects their own personality.
Almost everybody in this neighborhood gardens on some level or other.
Because we have smaller spaces here, it's a more doable yard.
You're not secluded in your backyard anymore like you were when you had a big backyard. You sit on your front porch and you see your neighbors and you say hi and they do the same thing.
At Mueller in East Austin, it's a new and yet old-fashioned way to garden, with compact yards that value resources and connect neighbors as nearby bungalows did years ago. It's a community that unites with nature, too, through the parks and ponds that have brought back the wildlife on land once covered by airport runways and parking lots.
Catellus, who is the developer of Mueller, is very sensitive to their design and what's happening with the environment.
Sunflowers that collect solar energy dot the I-35 access road. In the restored prairies, real native plants support wildlife habitat, framing human services and homes designed to be as resourceful as their gardens. Janelle Dozier faced two challenges, Texas weather and a downsized garden, when she and husband Don moved from New Orleans after Katrina.
We wanted to be close in town so that we could do all the fun stuff in downtown Austin. But so it was a trade-off, and then I realized how much you can do with a little postage stamp space.
Janelle's garden may be smaller, but every square foot packs a punch. After removing grass, she amended her clay soil for better drainage. She even has a Peggy Martin rose, a Katrina survivor that's just as tough in Texas. In the brutal alley strip that she calls the Strip Tease, Janelle affirmed her new roots with Texas natives.
And I realized, I'm right here in the city on the old airport lot, and I can have butterflies, I can have hummingbirds.
A few blocks away, Keith Rommel and partner Jose Brunel spend more time enjoying their low-maintenance garden than tending it.
It's a small yard and I just wanted to get as much impact from it as possible. Color was a big thing for me. I wanted a variety of color, so I think every color in the spectrum of the rainbow is in there. But not only the color, just texture and variety. So there's mulch and crushed granite and rock and different size rocks. So there's a lot of ways to add texture and interest to the yard, and that was my goal. The walkway was just pushed away and it's going right through the garden, so it makes it really look a lot more expansive. It looks like it's bigger than a yard than it really is.
Laura and Andy Atlas don't have far to go to pick organic food from their street-side garden. They've had an eye on Mueller since the airport moved. Not only did they buy into a resourceful home, they wanted a new garden perspective.
We had a typical lawn, with the front flower bed.
Yeah.
So this was very different from what we had had before.
Yeah, this is our first time to take out all the grass from a large area. We actually have a larger garden here than we would at our other house because it's manageable.
And the kids are out looking at, dragonflies and caterpillars and birds nesting, and it's really brought nature in a really intimate way.
There's a consciousness in the neighborhood. People, consciously don't want to use pesticides. People talk about all these kinds of issues. We've got a swallowtail caterpillar in a pot there. We've got barn swallows nesting in our eaves. We had a mourning dove that was a fledgling that was living on our patio for a couple of weeks. And all these things, and we came outside this morning, there was a dragonfly just sunning itself or just kind of hanging out there. You see all these things and it just makes you feel good.
The native prairie was the reason first adopters Carolyn and Glenn Hagler chose their lot.
Across from the greenbelt, I thought I can look out and pretend that I'm away from it all, even though I'm not.
An inspired gardener, Carolyn wanted to downsize from a large one in their former home.
Typical suburban yards are large, very full of grass, and so if you want to do anything, it requires a lot of work and a lot of upkeep. But this neighborhood, we have small spaces, small yards, and it's doable. It's not an overwhelming thing. I think that's what's the main difference here. People really do garden and love to see the difference that a little bit of work can do.
The new prairies are taking hold, despite the drought conditions since they were first seeded.
The Native American prairies have been so overused. They've been built on, they've been tilled, used for agriculture. There's a very tiny percentage of untouched native prairie left. So we had this great opportunity to recreate the prairie here at Mueller because we had native soils that had not been tilled.
To achieve the restoration, Catellus collaborated with Dr. Mark Simmons from the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center and RVI, Landscape Architectural Designers.
It's an example of what you can do green and native here in a totally urban area on top of what used to be tarmac and runways.
Mueller neighbors and residents like Janelle formed the Friends of the Prairie to maintain them.
When I do everything I can in my yard, I can always go out to the prairie and to the demonstration garden. I've got like a 30-acre garden out there to play with.
The wildflowers that grow over there are really inspiring because you know, they come back every year, they just do whatever they do, and I'd like to have some elements in my own garden.
There's all this stuff that is from right here that you can take the seeds back into your own yard and it will do great.
To illustrate how native plants can fit into a home garden, RVI landscape architect Chris Lawlich designed a more formal setting. A walk around his central labyrinth connects all viewpoints. Sculptor and Mueller neighbor Chris Levac designed the artwork to celebrate the garden's indigenous roots.
And this is a wigwam, which would be a Native American means of making a house at night where you pull saplings together.
Levac's pollen grain testifies to Austin's claim as allergy capital of the world. Each section of the prairie is planted for its biome. United by trails, popular for jogging and strolling, the main link is habitat cluster for wildlife diversity. Arachnophilia, designed by Houston artist Dixie Friend Gay, applauds the return of wildlife in the former parking lot. Water attracts the wildlife too, an engineering design that serves all new residents.
All these parks, these big parks, and the ponds themselves are really helping with stormwater control for Mueller.
At Lake Park, it's hard to imagine that I-35 or a busy shopping center is just around the corner.
2 blocks away, I can arrive at one lake and walk around, and then 2 blocks the other direction, I can walk to another lake and walk around. And the scenery, even around the lakes itself, it changes as you walk around.
In its innovative urban design, Mueller has an eye on the big picture, a community that connects service, neighborly bonding, and environmental responsibility.
And everybody's aware of nature and how we can incorporate nature into our gardens and as part of our homes, and then to have wildlife inhabit this urban space and create a space for wildlife where it's not just this human environment.
I think in the future, places like Mueller are going to be important because if we continue with the same cycle of tilling up our prairie, which is so ravaged already, that this is really a seed bank for what we might be able to spread into the future.
When you look at the gardens here, think about that this used to be under concrete, and we're just having the most fun doing this. And we're also learning a lot about soil, about improving soil, because if you can improve what was under tarmac, you can improve anything, you know.
Well, there are lots of cool things happening at the Mueller subdivision. Thanks for sharing all of those different projects with us. Now we're going to be talking about choosing the right plants for the right spots and really being observers of the world around us and the natural world around us in particular. I'm joined by Pat McNeal. Pat is with McNeal Growers, one of the pioneers of growing plants that are well adapted or native to our region, and it's great to have you back on the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's been a long time.
Yeah, it's been a while.
It's good. It's good to see you, Pat.
Yeah.
And this is on everybody's mind right now is like, how do we deal with all the different changes that seem to be occurring? And when we were talking just a little while ago, you were talking about balancing, keeping things in balance.
Yeah, yeah.
And let's start by talking about that, because we all could use a little more balance in our lives and in our gardens, I think.
Well, you know, you don't want to. You want to make sure that anything that you plant, of course, doesn't, isn't something that isn't going to, live. And our problem here is such extremes. Mm-hmm. So that balance is hard to maintain when you go from 60 inches of rainfall to 15 inches of rainfall 2 years later. So that's really hard to manage. And the only, I guess the inspiration for that would be, of course, the natural world, because it's over tens of thousands of years, millennia, has adapted to those things. Mm-hmm. And what we need to do is look at the model that looks at those, so we can use that knowledge. Mm-hmm. How do we, transpose that knowledge and use it in our landscapes and around our homes? And
you were talking about the old way was that we will force the land to do what we want it to do.
Well, the Daily Walk, when I first moved here, was real popular. People would come on the UT and look at azaleas growing in these, but they had to grow them in all these beds that were scattered around the campus. Mm-hmm. And that slowly went away because they realized, of course, you can do that. And I guess one of my favorite examples of that, San Antonio has a botanical garden, has a nice display of alpine plants, and they have to keep it refrigerated and it's on a big old thick piece of glass. It's a great learning tool, but it's so resource intensive. It's not like you could do your yard like that.
Sure.
And so what we have to do is look at how can we have a yard that doesn't waste all these resources. And what we learn is that pick the plant that fits the environment, which is completely 180 degrees difference. Mm-hmm. And I think the biggest problem is we're still doing that in a lot of ways in horticulture. Mm-hmm. Horticulture is a science based from agriculture, and all our agriculture is the same way, and eventually we're going to hit that wall too, where we're going to say we can't grow corn the way we used to because we have to put so much resources into it.
Right.
So we're going to see that earlier though, because in a landscape there's no profit from it or something that keeps us going. We just do it because it is around our house, it's in our watersheds, it doesn't make us a profit, so we're going to change quicker to something that saves resources. And now we see the real point of that when you go look at the lakes and see the dead trees and why we need to do that.
Well, I mentioned this notion of being an observer. And this is something I know that you're very keen about, encouraging people to look at the world around them, look in their own neighborhoods, look at the trees that are in your neighborhood as indicators of what should be planted.
And that's a real good observation that you can do in your own neighborhood, is look at that. Because, I had a fellow I worked with years ago, and he said, I used to work with aerials looking at vegetation, and from the vegetation, they could tell if there was gold ore in the ground. And so they would look for certain plants. There would be indicators of the kind of rock that had gold ore. So I used to think, well, you could do that with the vegetation. If you look at the kind of trees that you have, if you have little short trees, the soil's real shallow. If you have really tall trees, then you're going to have deeper soils. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing about that is that even if you observe that, then you can pick the right kind of plants. Mm-hmm. But if you don't observe it, you can't break that rule either, because I don't know how many people I've worked with that said, I want a big shade tree, and they live on the top of a hill.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just not possible.
Right.
The physical parameters are just not going to limit you to have a little scrubby tree. So I always tell people, just enjoy your view. Don't worry about it. Put an arbor up or something.
Right. And go ahead and plant your live oak, but it'll be a shrub.
It'll be an evergreen, more like a mountain laurel, or like the shin oaks you have up there, the big evergreen sumacs. So if you observe like places in Austin along creeks like Walnut Creek, you go down the creek, there's walnut trees, there's pecan trees, there's sycamore, big tall trees. So if you wanted to plant a big tree like a magnolia or something that needs deep soil, that would tell you. You can actually judge the depth of the soil by looking at the height of the trees.
Mm-hmm. And being aware, as you walk around in your neighborhood, being aware of what kinds of trees are there is an indicator. The type of terrain you reference, being on a hilltop here in Central Texas means you're sitting on top of limestone.
Right. And the other part about that is that nature doesn't quite have we don't really observe that nature has some kind of organization because we don't look at it closely enough. But when you look at it, you see that there's a subtle form of organization there. Plants are in certain places, it's not random. And I learned this by putting out some wildflowers around my place, widow's tears, baby blue eyes, stuff for the shade. And I put them out, and over 10 years, they've reorganized themselves to where they grow best. And so this is sort of the other part about landscaping, is that part of this is that you can't know all the variables about where you plant stuff. And so some things are going to move to the place that they do better. And especially if you do ground covers, you can see that with dahlias or stomodia or some of these other plants, is that you plant them here, and 2 years later they're over there because it's a little more sunny, a little more well drained, and they'll actually reorganize themselves. But these tree areas, like if you go on Walnut Creek or you go on Barton Springs, 80% of those plants are going to be the same plants because of the same physical environment. So you can look at those and go, well, what do I plant if I live in an area like that? Well, go and observe inland sea oats and plants like that. You can see that they're going to probably grow really well in your yard if those are the conditions. So you can, it's sort of like 15,000 years of testing has been going on constantly with our climate to find out what grows where. All we have to do is look out in the wild and see that.
And, you know, if there are pockets of native vegetation around, you'll get a pretty good idea. Often what I find, at least I'm a denizen of the central city now, and so when I go to the little green spaces around me, what I find are invader species, not as much as a native as you would expect.
Well, and also you see things like there's a good photograph that illustrates that of an acacia, little fern acacia, on one side of the fence, and then on the other side there's nothing because it gets grazed out. So we can create conditions ourselves where plants thrive and plants don't thrive. And what happens is, of course, we have created conditions where these other plants thrive. And then we got mesquite thriving, and we got prickly pear thriving, and we've got junipers thriving. So we get native and non-native plants thriving in these areas that we've modified through grazing or clearing for building. And so we actually, what I think is we've actually created a new habitat. Is that the urban environment, if you look at a soils map, it says, it doesn't tell you what kind of soil is in Austin. Where outside it does. It just says urban soils undivided. Because you can't tell. It's all been mixed and turned. And so what happens is we don't really know, in some cases, what the plant community that would be there naturally, because it's unnatural environment. So what happens is...
It's been so unnatural for so long that it's a distant memory at best.
And then that's why you get ligustrums in there. You know, I always wondered why my weeds grow better than my other plants. And that's why, because the area's disturbed, and they like disturbance. The climax plants, the long-lived plants, like live oaks, they don't like that total disturbance as much. And they won't come back like ligustrum will. Ligustrum will come back, or hackberries or some of these other, they come back so much faster in disturbed areas that they outcompete some of the longer lived plants like live oaks or hackberry or pecans or sycamores. And that's the difference why I was, that's why it's so much better. They like those conditions that we've created.
Well, you know, and I know you're used to dealing with every level of different folk out there. I mean, from big commercial landscaping companies to small mom and pop stores that are buying your plants. But you also talk to homeowners. And as we finish out the conversation here, what would your best advice be for the homeowners? You know, given the fact that we're telling them to be observant and be ready for change, I guess, in a sense. You know?
And that's it. Really be adaptable about. I run into a lot of people doing landscape design, because I do a little bit of that, and restoration. They go, well, I don't like orange, or I don't like, and it's just a preference. And it's like, you sort of have to let go with those. And sort of, that's the biggest thing is, it may be that lilacs was your sentimental favorite from Ohio, or I might need to let go of the idea.
Well, letting go is something that I think a lot of gardeners have learned to do in the past year or two.
I had to do that when I moved from California. It's like, these plants won't grow here.
Well, Pat, as always, it's fun seeing you. It's great to have you on the program. And McNeal Growers is your operation,
Yes.
and I know that you're going to be moving out to the Bastrop County area. So, best of wishes to you in that.
Great, thanks. Thanks for having me.
All right, good.
It's always fun.
All right. Well, coming up next, our good friend Daphne's on break, but we're going to check in with John Dromgoole for Backyard Basics.
Hello gardening friends, welcome to Backyard Basics. So we're in the last planting of the cool weather crops. It's a great time to kind of finish the season off. After this, some of these plants you couldn't grow because it's so darn hot. But let me show you some. This is kale. Kale is so nutritious. It's probably the most nutritious plant in the cool months. It really is. And it gets quite large. It's a big old thing. Give it space. But it does very, very well. I heard about a fellow who was using them in his smoothies, you know, so this is a very nutritious little plant right here. And we can do another round of lettuce. That's really good. This one right here is called Galactica. These are Galactica right here. You know, something about this lettuce is that it can be used ornamentally. You can take it down the sidewalk and use it there. You can put it in a container and make it really, really pretty. Maybe mix it up with some of these green ones. This is Italian right here. Mix those up. Gosh, it's a pretty container and a good place to eat from. So it's time to put in the transplants of the lettuce. Look at this guy. He's really pretty. This one's called Freckles. Freckles is such a pretty little lettuce. So they're very ornamental when you use them in the home garden. Sidewalk, the vegetable garden itself, or in containers. And if you don't have much garden space, this is perfect for that limited garden space. Now this is the time when we plant our onions, and onions do very well at this time. They won't be harvested until June or so, but you got to get them in. It's time to get them in. Go to the nurseries, you'll find them right there. There are many varieties for the Central Texas area, and so onions need to go in. Look at these little bundles. They probably have 50 onions. And you know how far apart they should be planted is that far. So we use that as a marker. Harley Clark showed me that one. And they do extremely well. Another root crop are potatoes. It's time to put potatoes in, and you can do that for the next couple of weeks. So go ahead and get yourself some potatoes. There are varieties for the area once again, and go and pick from those at your favorite garden center. Chinese cabbage, last planting of such a delicious plant. It's a great one. Once again, it could go in containers, but I like it in the garden. This one right here is another one of those beets, but it's more important as an ornamental, kinda. This one's called, as unusual as it is, bull's blood. And this is a real pretty little plant. And a bunch of those in the garden, very, very attractive. And of course, you can eat the beet leaves, so that's really good. Chard. Chard is one of those things that it can almost be used ornamentally, except it's related to spinach and very nutritious, and you can eat off of there by pulling the side leaves off every day. And so look at the colors in here. There are several colors. This little peach one, there's yellow, there's a light red, and then there's a dark red right there. Chard is really a neat plant, and they get big. And sometimes gardeners can keep them 2 years. So I would use some chard out there because it's a really wonderful plant. And here's a little spinach. We've been growing this one for a while, and it's delicious. Red Deer is the name of this. You can see that red stem down there. It's kind of flat and really neat. It's the sand or compost comes off of there very easily when you're washing it. Also from seed, you could start your chard from seed if you choose. Look at the colors right there. A rutabaga, yeah, it's the last chance to plant rutabagas. And beets, look at all the colors they come in. One of these companies, many companies actually, put them into several colors. That's a nice one. Look at those colors. Kids are going to love that one right there, and they look great on the table. Here's that combination of lettuce that I was talking about. And if you really want to grow something very interesting, these carrots come in multiple colors, and it's a lot of fun to harvest them because you don't know what color you're going to get. So there you go, some plants that can go in right now and for the next couple of weeks for the late winter garden, and a good way to start off your spring garden. For Backyard Basics, I'm John Dromgoole. I'll see you next time.
Visit klru.org/CTG to watch online, find out more, and visit our blog. Next week, check out Spring to Summer Vegetables with Springdale Farm. Until then, I'll see you in the garden.
To learn about today's program, watch online, and follow CTG's blog, check out klru.org/CTG.